So it'll be interesting to see how many of those pulls Echo and Perplex take on. But first, we have Sanguine Depths, and you see the team starting off really quick. You see that there's that Sigil of Misery coming out on Echo, where Perplexed is actually using an invisibility potion on Divine Field to allow him to mitigate as much damage before he ends up leaping all the way back to the Lantern. Both of them are getting Life Gripped right on top of that, activating it as quickly as possible, and they are going to try to burn all of these mobs on top of that Lantern, which will, once they die, they do give a group a healing increase and a damage dealt increase as well.
Yeah, you want to try and kill as many things as you can on top of that Lantern. Up to 10 will give you that stacking 5% damage and healing buff, and that is really nice to carry forward in this dungeon, especially because there are so many difficult pulls when you combine them like this. I mean, you could see just how much finesse was required to set this up, either using Sigil of Misery or that Invis pot, like you mentioned, to make sure that your tank isn't just getting killed while they're trying to group the whole pack up, which can be one of the most dangerous parts of the dungeon for tanks, actually.
Yep. So now both teams looking like they're getting the pull down about at the exact same time. Perplexed with a little bit of health left on that Mist Dancer. The Mist Dancer, of course, does spawn those image copies, and it takes a long time to actually get into the pack because it will start doing their joust style animation. So that will definitely be the last mob to die under typical circumstances. Now Echo here doing something that's not commonly shown on live. They're actually pulling all of this little cubby area, but they're using line of sight to make sure that all the ticks are able to get in because they do a cast, this Engorge cast. So they chained Silent Sigil, and now they're using Leg Sweep to try to mitigate the amount of Engorge damage coming out. Now they're using Dragon's Breath, Sigil of Misery, that kind of stuff to be able to, again, slow down those Engorges coming out of those ticks. Now their first Pride has spawned, which makes me believe that they're going to play this Pride and then take the rest of their remaining trash into Crixus, which is the first boss of the instance. And if you see in the small box in the bottom right, looks like Perplex is doing something similar.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see a similar pull sizing and pull sequencing coming out of these two teams. Usually one of the ways that the top teams will beat the bottom teams will be because they're just doing the dungeon in fewer pulls than those teams. But between Echo and Perplexed, I don't think that that's likely to be a big difference. I think that for the most part, they're going to find ways to do the dungeon in roughly the same amount of pulls, unless somebody has a genius idea that the other team didn't come up with.
First weekend, though, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for random genius ideas.
There's, neither of these teams had seen what the other was doing going into this weekend. It is worth noting that Perplexed did see what Echo did yesterday, and they had some time to potentially adopt those strategies and tactics into their pathing. The converse isn't true, right? Echo hasn't seen what Perplexed is up to, so to some extent that's an advantage for Perplexed in this dungeon. If they had something great they came up with, they still get to deploy it for the first time here and catch Echo by surprise.
Yep. So now you do see that charge coming in. They basically want all this trash dead prior to the Shattering Slam, which summons these little orbs that will have to be soaked. That seems like the most reasonable break point that you're going to be looking to beat on the boss. Crixus is at 30% HP whenever for Echo whenever it actually gets engaged by Perplexed. So right now, even though they've been doing the exact same pulls, Echo is starting to surmount a slight lead.
Yeah, Echo is really, they finished that first pull off faster. They managed to get all the mobs in the AoE. They didn't have anything kind of left out. And that advantage is sort of compounded for them. They've just been doing things slightly quicker. The health differential is a bit misleading. This boss is a fortified boss that's being attacked with Bloodlust and with Prideful buff. So you can see it's already at 30% on the side of Perplex. It's not that long for the world over there. But this will be something like a 30-second advantage accrued by Echo here in the first 4 minutes of the dungeon. So they're definitely off to a blazing fast start.
Yep. It's definitely front-loaded, like you were saying. So now Echo is making their way into this next area. And something that you can see that they're doing is they're utilizing Paralysis and Cage to be able to CC out the Inspired mobs. So as one of the new affixes coming into this expansion, Inspiring is very similar to Emissary of the Tides if you put Season 3 of Battle for Azeroth, where it doesn't allow mobs that are nearby the Inspired mob itself to be kicked or afflicted by any CC. So they're playing these Inspired mobs kind of by themselves, or not pulling them into the Oppressors, rather, to make sure that they're able to kick as many of the Oppressor casts as possible. So now that Sprite that was Paralysis on the side is now getting broken. You do see that Caged mob also off to the side. As soon as the Sentinel dies, I'm sure that will get pulled as well. on the side of Perplex, they have downed Crixus, and they're doing something similar with the Paralysis and the Cage on the Inspired mob. So nothing too surprising coming in. Looks like the exact same route so far.
Yeah, you can see, there are actually some differences in the builds that these players are running. We do see the same 5 specs on these two teams, but now is actually running quite a different Vengeance Demon Hunter than Divine is on the side of Perplexed. Divine is playing that kind of standard live key Kyrian Vengeance Demon Hunter with the Fiery Brand Legendary. That's something we've seen a lot of players use, but now in both this dungeon and actually in several others has been instead using the Venthyr. And also playing the Darkness Legendary, where when he drops below 35% health, he automatically triggers Darkness on a 2-minute internal cooldown. And that effect has been very powerful for them so far. It's definitely an interesting difference that I think now has really come up with and used compared to several of the other tanks in the tournament. He's not the only DH to play Venthyr, but he's the only one to have played it this much.
What is Wolf Disco doing? Wolf Disco just popped his Invis and was running around while the rest of his group was finishing off a few trash packs, but I couldn't tell exactly what he was doing. It seems as maybe as if he was proccing the RP to try to get the Overseers moved across the bridge, but I guess I'm not 100% sure. So now Echo onto their Manifestation of Pride, while Perplexed seems to be about half a trash pack behind still. They're doing the exact same pulls currently, and Echo's just doing them faster.
Yeah, did Echo end up getting the mobs spawned by that RP as well? I think they did, right? So
no.
We're looking at the exact same percentage.
Now did it by himself? Okay, so yes, they did end up getting them spawned, but it took them longer. So Wolf Disco was able to invis off combat and start proccing the RP a little bit early, where now had to walk up there himself, wait for the mobs, and then he was able to pull them with Sigil Flame. And so that actually helps Perplexed kind of catch up a little bit, but they're still not ahead enough. Does it come down to the damage differential on the tank? Where do you think the damage differential is really coming from here?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily expect Venthyr to be higher damage than Kyrian inherently. And
I would agree.
It's tough to say whether it's like a spec damage difference versus just a gameplay wise damage difference coming out here. And in some cases, it's not even overall damage that's difference. You can do a lot of DPS on a pull, but if there's one mob that's left out of that pull and then you have to kill it after, that can be a real slowing effect on your key.
It could have come down to the Mist Dancer just not getting grouped up quick enough, right? Starting to do their joust.
Right. I mean, we're still in a position where either of these two teams, they're both, there's like maybe half a pull separating them in terms of time right now. So I wouldn't say that this is by any stretch Echo far in the lead, and I think that just with good finesse from here, Perplexed could catch back up. But so far I think that the advantage that Echo has gotten is just from those little optimizations.
It seems like we're starting to get a little bit of a routing difference now coming in from Echo versus Perplexed as to when they're pulling those mobs on the Lantern versus pulling some other, a little bit different of trash. Now Echo is into the non-elite area of the dungeon, pulling the Death's Wardens and the Scribes into those non-elites and that guy that spawns that tornado. I don't know what the name of him is. But yeah,
I think Perplex is doing the same thing. I think we're seeing almost the exact same route, just a slight bit slower on the side of Perplex. Oh, Zalia going down though. Fragments at 1% HP for Echo.
That's fine.
So they're going to go and meld off that Pride. I don't know exactly what caused the death there.
Quick!
No, Frag! Frag getting brutally murdered by the Quaking Affix. That Affix, of course, does quite a bit of damage if you do Quake one of your friends. It's been changed from its Battle for Azeroth version, such that you don't actually take any damage from a Quake if you do not stack up. But if you do stack up, it does more damage as soon as you have more than one person stacked up with you, and the same damage at one person. So it did quite a bit of damage there, as there was a little bit, and he was already fairly low on health as well.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a really good spot for Perplex to actually be in. It allows them to be able to catch up a little bit. Unfortunately enough, they don't have a Soothe in their comp, so they basically these non-elite mobs have an enrage effect that bolsters their HP by a lot. But if you dispel it off, they'll just die. Unfortunately, they don't have an enrage dispel, so they had to DPS down that guy from a lot of HP through a lot of HP that they otherwise wouldn't have to.
All right, and it looks like they are going to get started with the same pull going in the same direction as Echo. They are starting this pull a solid 45 seconds after Echo, but it's worth noting that we now have a 10-second death differential that is going to be in favor of Perplex. So if this dungeon comes down to the wire, Perplexed may well benefit from those deaths on the side of Echo.
Ooh, goodness. A Shine standing in that Vestige. Vestige is like a ground effect that it ends up dropping just periodically. There's a lot going on right here. They're trying to make sure that the mobs are going to die in the Lantern, but since they're running a double melee DPS composition, it's kind of hard to be able to position the mobs in that Lantern while also at the same time having good melee uptime. You see Ashine still struggling to have good uptime on the rest of the mobs while also being healed.
So what happened here was the Vestige was tanked near the Lantern when it dropped its first, ground zone thing, and that kind of zoned them out of that entire space. If you were watching Echo's side, they were instead having now fight the Vestige far away from the Lantern at first, and then after it dropped the puddle, they dragged everything onto the Lantern, and that made it so that they weren't in such an awkward position where you wanted to get back through that brutal ground zone.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that the Lantern there is actually worth that much.
Yeah, so you only get benefits from the amount of mobs that you kill near it, and only some mobs actually do give you credit for it. Summoned mobs and very little mobs often don't actually go into the Lantern. I believe most of the mobs in this area do count, but you're only pulling packs of 3 or 4, so you're getting a minute's worth of 15% or 20% damage and healing. It's certainly something, and it's worth grabbing if you can, but it's not worth sacrificing huge efficiency for.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think that Vestige doesn't for some reason. But yeah, basically, even at best case scenario, they would only get like a 15% damage gain, and from the looks of it, it didn't look like they were gonna. It looked like they were doing the pull slower than if they just did it normally, to the point where I'm not sure how worth that 15% damage gain is. However, for Perplex, you can actually see this right here. They have changed it into the second Lantern. So if you refresh the buff from the Lantern, you're actually able to stack it up. So say they only had 3 stacks to begin with. Now they're able to get 3 more stacks as long as they kill these mobs within a minute of the buff. So that actually could potentially be worth it, and I think that as a whole seems pretty reasonable for me. The original 3 stacks may have been questionable, though.
Yeah, I mean, the original 3 stacks, the fact that they were fresh, right? You're basically getting double benefit from them, right?
Exactly. Exactly the point is that now that I see what they're doing, I definitely do agree that it probably is worth, because now they have 6 stacks, which is a nice 30% damage bump. So pretty relevant. Echo, though, is, I would still say, firmly in the driver's seat. They have pulled the second boss, Executor Tarvald. Probably one of the hardest bosses in the game right now.
Absolutely one of the most difficult bosses in really Shadowlands, but this dungeon has 2 really hard bosses. That first one and this second boss, really difficult. You can see they're making sure that they're dodging these tornadoes. The tornado dodges, actually not the most punishing part of this fight. It's primarily that massive damage of the castigation cast and the damage that the ad will pulse on the whole group. Particularly, both of those events happening at the same time can lead to real disasters if you don't have cooldowns ready to use against it.
So yeah, making sure they use major personals against it is the most important thing. Of course, if you do,
here it comes.
They don't have hunters here, but if they did have hunters,
Zelia?
they could absolutely feign death every single one of the castigations that's on them. They do also have access to meld and some other tools. I think the scariest part is if Zelia gets targeted like 3 times in a row, because he blew the pain suppression on the first one. Now, if he gets targeted again, it will probably be the meld. As you actually see it right there, he melds that one. Now, if he gets a third one, he doesn't have anything. He's just gonna have to heal himself. He'll probably like dome, if I had to guess. But like, the Echo Squad is in a very scary point, especially since they also pulled these ghouls. And we talked about this last time we saw Echo and Sanguine Depths. These ghouls are a lot of tank damage, but the notable thing about these ghouls and what they're going to do here for Echo is that they're going to spawn their pride. They're going to spawn their pride as soon as they die. So they're pulling them into the second boss to try to get the most efficient amount of cleave possible. But then they've just used barrier and had the auto darkness proc. So now I think they don't even have anti-magic zone anymore. So once they do get this pride spawning, if they are going to elect to kill it, which they did last time, they don't have a lot for it. So they're going to have to blow offensive cooldowns, because generally whenever you're fighting a pride, you're either using defensive or offensive cooldowns, and more often than not, you end up just using defensive cooldowns because it's more efficient that way. But here you're going to have to see something be popped, probably from Mirez, just looking at the state of their CDs. But if Zelia would actually just be able to heal through this without any barrier, anti-magic zone, auto darkness, any of that, I would be quite impressed.
It's difficult because they need a lot of their cooldowns for the next pull they're going to do. They're going to pull the whole boss room onto the boss with their Bloodlust, and they really need to make sure that everything dies quickly because there's an Inspiring Mob in there preventing them from getting any kicks while they're doing that. So they actually can't afford to use very much on this. You can see, though, Xaylia fairly low on mana. He did get a little bit of a drink. He got a couple ticks off on his drink before they started this pull, but you can see, wow, look at the way he's just managing everybody's health bar. Every single person in the group sub 50% there at the end, but nobody at 0%. That is the mark of a real expert healer on that kind of situation, making sure that he's getting the full value out of everybody's health bar. Here we go with that massive pull. The entire room, including an Oppressor with that Inspiring Aura, with the Bloodlust is going to come out, and there goes Gingy combusting. Mira's popping all his cooldowns, and they're going to get those ads down
60
right
DPS
before a disaster from all the casts would have happened.
All right, on the side of Perplex, they're doing something similar. They have gotten the second boss down. Executioner Tarvald has died. Now they just have this Pride to deal with, and they're like right behind Echo, doing a very similar route from what we've seen from them. They ended up getting the ghouls as well. They're spawning the Pride. They're killing it here. Notably, they do have more defensive cooldowns. You see that Power Word Barrier coming out of Perplexed. But Echo, they look like they only have like 30% left on Grand Proctor. Yeah. There is a 2-death differential to point out, the 10 seconds, but I think Echo is more like 45 seconds in the lead, maybe 50 seconds in the lead.
I think probably more at this point. I think they've made up time even further over the past little while. They've just done these bosses so quickly.
Yeah, so it's definitely a more concise route. It seems like it's going from them. Even though they're playing a similar route, they're just setting up their pulls and getting to the pulls just slightly quicker, and they're able to edge out a few seconds every single time, like 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, and it's just like starting to nickel and dime them an even more insurmountable lead. And now they have the third boss down by the time Perplexed has actually pulled it. Now they're going to be making their way towards the final boss, a General Call, and they're going to use invisibility potions here to be able to skip all of this trash. That trash right there, especially on Inspiring, annoying to deal with, and it's just slow. It's kind of efficient count-wise, but most notably it has a bunch of oppressors in it, which reduce your damage dealt and just slow you down. So skipping it seems fairly reasonable for an MDI style route.
Yeah, so here we can see Perplexed actually managed to execute that exact same pull that Echo did. They managed to get all that trash onto the Grand Proctor, get it all killed without too much difficulty. You can see Dr. J and Swagfist also ascending on the meters, much like Gingy and Miraz did. So these two teams very much able to pull off similar strategies as each other. And yeah, I think we've seen a lot of similarity between these two routes. That's something that, it's impressive for Perplexed to be able to pull off these pulls as well.
Dr. J's good brother, Dr. Wolf Disco.
Oh wait, dude! I literally just read Doctor, and my brain filled in the rest, and I didn't read the rest of the name. I'm a fool. I got tricked. I think that's exactly what the trick was going for.
Again, and now they are making their way, doing a very similar route to Echo. They're probably going to invisibility potion here again. I think it seems the most reasonable way to skip all this trash because it's not the most efficient stuff. While on the side of Echo, they've pulled a bunch of these cadets and other mobs into the Lantern, trying to get as many stacks of that Lantern buff as they possibly can. They did do a double pull on top of it. These Gargons also notably give you stacks of the Lantern buff if you kill them on top of it. So there's a lot of damage increases that they're trying to stack up here with this Lantern before then going into the next trash pull.
They're going to be already the 10 stack here, but notably killing these Gargons while the Lantern is still up is going to refresh their buff. So they're going to get another 60 seconds worth now of it going into the rest of the pull. You can see that soul kind of being shot out from the Lantern at these players. That means they have another minute of plus 50% damage and healing. So that will make this next pull that they're going to do a lot easier. So you can see now is going to grab a lot of mobs here after. So actually they're going to kill General Call, and then they're going to do all the rest of the trash at some point in the future. First, it looks like they're going to grab these guys. So this is going to be a chain pull.
How are you feeling about Xaylia's mana here? Because they're gonna,
it's good.
They're going to get a Pride, and they're going to melt it off, so they don't have to deal with it. But he's definitely starting to look a little bit tapped on mana. Fortunately enough, though, with the melting of the Pride and the skipping of some of the trash, they should be okay. He should be able to get a few ticks of mana before anything does end up happening.
General Call isn't a especially healing intensive boss, particularly when her Wicked Rush is targeting players like Gingy who can blink out of it, or Xaylia who can actually Night Fae out of it. So as long as they're avoiding getting too much damage on the group, he can probably do that boss with something like 10 or 5% mana going in. He should probably be fine just being mana neutral on that boss encounter. It's mostly just a question of whether he has enough to heal the Pride. But they're skipping the Pride, so they don't even need to do that. All he has to do is heal now in this big pull. So yeah, I think he's going to be totally fine.
Yeah. On the side of Perplex, now they're doing a similar Lantern pull. They're actually taking it a little bit slower, so they're going to get their refresh a little bit later, trying to make sure that they maximize the amount of time that they can actually extend with the buff. But notably, they are still just a little bit behind. They've done a virtually identical route, but again, like I talked about earlier, they're just getting nickel and dime time-wise. 10 seconds here, 5 seconds there, and are still starting to slide a little bit even further behind. Echo, on the other hand, has now finished off the last trash of the dungeon that they do need. They are going to use their Night Fae abilities and blink away, then meld off all that trash. Zelia's, you see his mana is actually regenerating. Looks like he only needs about 35 to 40% mana for this fight. As long as people are able to dodge out of the way of the Wicked Rush or just not take too much damage from the Wicked Rush, everything should be okay.
Timer check here. Sanguine Depths yesterday for Echo took them 23 minutes and 20 seconds. They're on pace to dramatically improve on that time, even with those 2 deaths. Perplexed, on the other hand, are also on pace to beat that time. So Perplexed are well in range of being competitive here. And this was absolutely a great run from them. But it looks like unless something goes wrong on General Call, Echo are going to get the edge on this series with just some... So as you mentioned, nickels and dimes, 10 seconds here, 15 seconds there. I think really starting with the very first pull of the dungeon, you could just see they were able to do things slightly faster. Not hugely better, not anything massively different, but slightly better, slightly more execution, slightly more damage perhaps. And that really is all it takes to, and then just do the whole dungeon perfectly. A very easy thing for Echo.
I think Perplexed is actually going to have about the exact same time that Echo had yesterday. Whenever their run finishes up. Mm-hmm. And notably Perplexed, 0 deaths. So it's not like they had it. They've had an excellent run. Like, there's nothing that either of these teams should be upset about. It's just whenever you have the 2 juggernaut teams that are really innovating a lot of the strategies that you're going to see coming in from week to week, stuff like that happens. And so at this point, if you're Perplexed, you can't even be upset. You're now looking towards that Spires of Ascension, and you're like, oh, okay, so what do we need to do differently in the Spires of Ascension from what we had our run yesterday, and making sure that Perplex continues to stay focused and play their own game while Echo is able to take down General Call once it does hit 50%. I would say that's the most important thing that they can do for themselves now.
Dude, the quaking overlaps with all those mechanics at the same time looked brutal for Echo, but they were able to handle it with very, very little damage taken. So really, really well played by an incredible team. It's going to be a 1-0 series so far for Echo, up in the lead here after our game 1. Oh, Zalia killed after the fact,
though. No! Yeah, and with how good they are, you kind of really have to look at the one little hiccup they had to try to even break down what happened to them. And according to Gingy from our chat here, it looks like what happened is Hylia died to an invisible firebomb. That was their only other death aside from this quaking death here. Like, man, it just takes a mechanic not being shown for these guys to make any mistakes. But yeah, something Heddles was talking about, their ability to make sure they have everything stacked up right now, making sure they get those interrupts and silences out on these oppressors, is just a good example of how ridiculously good they are at their mob control. And I feel like that's gotta be it, right? In addition, that in addition to just how good they are at planning out their cooldowns for every pack and making sure everyone's getting maximum just eking out every last percentage of damage they can get from their cooldowns. It's just one of the reasons this team is so nutty.